Our next presenter is Chris Taylor. He's a project director from the Cross County Metro Link Extension. Chris joined the Metro, formerly Bi-State Development Agency, in August of 1999 as the Deputy Project Director for the 17-mile St. Clair County Metro Link Extension. He was subsequently named Project Director and successfully guided the project to an early opening on May 7, 2001. He then served as Project Director for Phase 2 of the St. Clair County Metro Extension, overseeing the successful expansion of MetroLink to Scott Air Force Base. Chris currently serves as Project Director for the Cross County Metro Link Extension, which is an 8-mile light rail project stretching from Forest Park Metro Link Station to St. Louis County in Shrewsbury, so I'm sure he's going to show us where that is. Prior to joining Metro, Chris managed the engineering office for 2 consulting firms and oversaw the design of a number of transportation and infrastructure projects in Missouri. Chris has a bachelor's degree from University of Missouri and a master's degree from Washington University in St. Louis. Chris has taught a course in the Graduate Construction Management Program at Washington University in St. Louis. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad Mark had a chance to talk a lot about the FTA process. I kind of debated on how much I wanted to put into my presentation about that, so he covered it well, so I won't spend too much time on that. I asked Amy what you guys wanted to hear about, and she sent me a list of questions, and there were a lot of questions. And then she told me, I'll try and keep it down to 20 and 25 minutes, so I put together the presentation, kind of walked through it, and it's going to be about 2.5 hours the first time. So I tried to trim it down as much as I could, so I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions at the end, but I'm just going to kind of skip everything, details about many items, just kind of hit everything broad brush. Unlike Phoenix, you know, we're on our 4th project now, and each of the 4 projects is very different. So I'll kind of talk about each of the differences in those projects as I go through. A little bit about Metro. St. Louis and the relationship with the state is different than many transit or traditional transit cities. You know, we get very little funding from the state. Originally, when we started the system, back in '93, we would get on the order of $4 to $5 million a year from the state, and that's decreased ever since. So essentially we get about $1 million from the state now, and we have to pay self-insurance taxes and a couple other taxes back to the state that exceed $1 million. So we get negative money from the state. Our metropolitan planning organization is a little bit different than many other cities in that they lead the corridor study effort, and they will actually take the design up to about 10%. So they decide where it goes, take it to 10%, then they give it over to Metro. We do final design and we build it. Metro itself has no taxing authority. We get our funding from St. Louis City and St. Louis County via appropriations for half-cent sales tax that was passed 20-odd years ago. The good news is we do have condemnation authority, which obviously helps out a lot in the right-of-way acquisition for these type of projects. And Metro is governed by a 10-member board of commissioners. It's right in St. Louis, right on the edge of Missouri and Illinois, and probably 80% of our system's in St. Louis, 20% is in Illinois. It was set up via a compact. It was ratified by the federal government back around 1950, and it states that we have to have 5 commissioners from Missouri, 5 commissioners from Illinois. And the difficulty of this is, in order to get anything passed, you need to have a majority from both states. So I got to get 3 Missouri commissioners and 3 Illinois commissioners to get anything passed. So, as I said, it's a challenge all the time with most of our system being in Missouri, but we still need 3 of the 5 Illinois commissioners to get anything passed. Here's our system map. You can see up in the top left, there's Lambert Airport. It goes down, and the vertical purple line there is the Mississippi River. Missouri on the left, Illinois on the right, and it goes out to St. Clair County. Here's Scott Air Force Base, which was mentioned in the bio. And all of the red alignment is functioning now. And the green alignment off to the left there is the Cross County project, which is undergoing construction right now. Phase 1 is the alignment that opened in 1993. It goes from Lambert Airport just across the river into East St. Louis, Illinois. Phase 2 was actually broken up into two projects. It opened in 2001 and 2003, and then we're working on Phase 3 now. Overall, we have 38 miles in operation, as I mentioned the opening dates here. The overall system concepts, and most of these decisions were made early 80s. They started the projects in the first project, Phase 1, in the late 80s. When they have high capacity, over 300, and I think the maximum on our two-car consist is about 420 people per train. High speeds, 55 miles per hour maximum. Our average speed for the whole system is around 30 miles an hour. And in Illinois, where we have a greater station spacing, it's higher than that, about 34. High platform, there's pluses and minuses there. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments. The theory back at the time was faster boardings, better service for persons with disabilities. Obviously, it has to be fully integrated with the Metro bus system. And the real key to our initial alignment is that it hit all of the activity centers, and that really drove our successful ridership. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Here's Phase 1 with all of our stops. It's roughly about a mile between stops. You can see this is the downtown area here, which is a lot closer. Funding of Phase 1 was very interesting. Actually created a policy change at FTA. We didn't have any local money at the time. So there were a lot of visionaries that were wanting to get the system up and going starting in the early 70s. Trying to figure out how to do it, and most people, I think, would tell you that no one, hardly anyone, believed that a rail system would ever fly in St. Louis area. But these leaders tried to figure out a way to get it going, knowing that they wouldn't be able to get any money on a vote or a referendum. So what they proposed was, instead of providing cash for the local match, they provided real estate with value. So they had the Eads Bridge, which crosses the Missouri River, as well as some downtown tunnels, an abandoned rail right-of-way, and they offered that up to the federal government, had it appraised, and said, here, this is worth $180 million. And the federal government said, okay, that'll be your local match. So we didn't have to put a dime in. And of course, not too many people like that, and they did away with that immediately afterwards. But it got us going. Phase 1 was mostly abandoned rail right-of-way, which was nice, kept the cost down. It's a little bit more difficult to get stations in there, but I think it was probably 75 to 80% abandoned rail right-of-way, and then we had a tunnel going underneath downtown that was already there, so that saved us a lot on construction costs as well. Mark mentioned the cost per mile, that $40 million would be great. Our first three projects, we each did for about $20 million a mile. So it is possible, however, the abandoned rail right-of-way is a key component of that. If we had the tunnel underneath our downtown now, it would be much more like our current project, which is about $70 million a mile. Final capital costs, see the original estimate's $380, and actually it was about $460, but again, that includes the appraisal of the property downtown, which is $180 million, I believe. And then I talked about the local match. Ridership projections for our first year of operation were around 16,000, and we, exceeded that by nearly 50% right from the get-go. So it's been a big success story. And the major reason on our initial alignment was because we hit a number of important ride attractors. And here's a list of them. Obviously, we feel connecting to the airport is key. We have two major universities, and we've since connected to two others now. Actually, three others. So we're going to have 5 universities on the alignment. Regional hospital complex, the Barnes Jewish or BJC, which is one of the top 5 hospitals in the country. It's just a mammoth complex. The people that work there take the system. It's a big chunk of our ridership. All the sports arenas downtown, stadium, both the stadiums, Savage Center with the Blues play, Convention Center, all the downtown attractions surrounding the Arch, as well as Forest Park, which is a big municipal park, and the zoo. So that was the real key, and again, we're really fortunate that we had the existing abandoned rail right-of-way that came close to a lot of those, so it didn't take a lot of additional property acquisition around those. Our next project was the St. Clair extension. This goes over into Illinois. Our original alignment terminated up in the top left up there in East St. Louis, which is just over the river. Another way that we were able to get the project going initially was, as I mentioned, we had those 5 commissioners from Missouri and Illinois. So it took a lot of cooperation between the two states. Our congressmen from Missouri were trying to get support of the Illinois congressional delegation. In order to do that, they had to promise Illinois that if you help us get our first alignment going and get the FTA full funding grant agreement approved, we will agree to have the second extension going to Illinois. So this became phase 2. Take it back here for a moment. There were really 2 corridors under consideration in Illinois. And this goes down what's Highway 161, which is a very established area. It starts off in an urban region in East St. Louis and kind of goes out more residential. And then out here you're pretty much cornfields. So it gets to all of them. The other potential alignment was going straight out Highway 64, right up here. But that was developing fine on its own as the major east-west thoroughfare through that region. So the local leaders decided that they wanted to go down Route 61 to spur redevelopment. It was getting pretty old and starting to get run down in a lot of those areas, and that has proven to be a very wise decision. A lot of those areas are reinvigorated, and I'll show you some pictures of the redevelopment we've had around those stations a little bit later. We did have a portion of abandoned rail right-of-way going through this area as well. And that was probably half, about 2/3 actually, of the right-of-way that we needed was abandoned. As I mentioned, we go through rural areas, urban areas, suburban, run the full gamut. The original estimate to go all the way out to Mid-America Airport, which we haven't gone yet, was $440 million. We since cut it back. We didn't go out to the airport. We only went out to Scott Air Force Base. And actually the cost is around $400 million, and we came in under budget on both the projects that we broke it down to. Local match was accomplished via a half-cent sales tax that was passed in Illinois right after we opened the initial Metrolink alignment. These are back in the good old days. The FTA gave us 72%, and the local match was 28%. The forecast, ridership forecast, had 10,000 additional riders projected in Illinois for the first year. We had 12,000. I think we're up to about 14,000 now. And here are the additional elements that we've added to the system when expanding to Illinois. We had a couple more universities, hospitals, to add to our attractions. As it turned out, the Illinois alignment has really turned into almost a commuter alignment. I mentioned the spacing in Illinois. The stations are farther apart. There's about 17 miles. We only have 9 stations, so it's about every 2 miles over there. And that keeps the speed up, which is obviously good for the commuters. There's not the density of people over on the Illinois side that there is on St. Louis. So that affects our overall operating plan. As you might imagine, we don't send all of our trains out during the day because not too many people riding. They just ride it between the peak hours. So it's kind of been a ongoing tinkering process, but during the peak hours, it's standing room only. The first sub-project that we had in Illinois was what we call phase 2, which went out to college, Belleville Area College at the time, and then we broke off a little piece and went from Belleville Area College out to Scott Air Force Base, where it terminates now. We ended up calling that project phase 2A. The original project was going to go all the way out, as I mentioned, to Mid-America Airport. We had to cut that back due to funding constraints. So the second project was only 3.5 miles, and it was mostly through cornfields, so it was very easy to build. And the key here was to connect it to Scott Air Force Base. And there's a lot of concern by the congressmen in Illinois to keep that base open every time the BRAC commissions come up. And I felt that making this investment to Scott would help accomplish that. Additionally, Scott has a lot of people that fly into Lambert, and so So this connects, kind of gives us an airport-to-airport connection across the region. So this was about a 3.5-mile project, $75 million, and came in a little bit beneath that. And that was used the same half-cent sales tax that I mentioned before for the local contribution. However, the major part of the funding came from the state of Illinois, and that was 80% from the state, which was nice and very contrary to Missouri, as I mentioned earlier. And finally, the cross-county project, which we're working on now. It connects into the existing alignment up at the Forest Park station right there, heads out to Clayton, which is kind of our secondary central business district, and then heads south to Shrewsbury. These are major thoroughfares, I-64, which I mentioned earlier, which is a major east-west highway through the region. There's another Highway 44. These are all kind of spoke highways that go into downtown. This project's been different than the others and much more challenging. Very controversial, very political, and the key here is that it's going right through the oldest, most developed area of St. Louis. If you look at the east-west portion of the alignment from Forest Park to Clayton, that's all running next to, beneath, or over a roadway we call Forest Park Parkway. And very affluent neighborhoods all along there, so there's no abandoned rail right-of-way. However, once you make the turn to go along I-170 there, we have some abandoned right-of-way, pretty much from Clayton down to Sunnan, so that helped us out. But the east-west portion has been where most of the challenge is. The NPO studied this for, it says 3 years, it was actually longer than that. The final study was 3 years. And they held hundreds of meetings. And then when we received it from the NPO, the 10% design that I mentioned, we had another 100 meetings for the first year with all of the neighborhood design groups. Mark mentioned we had a very similar program where we tried to get a group of people from the neighborhoods around each station for their input. It's a very tight corridor, there's not much room, very difficult to construct, very high real estate costs. St. Louis County or the state of Missouri to try and condemn them, but that's a big political mess, as you might imagine. So instead of getting the right of way, we had these agreements, and these agreements, you definitely want to avoid these agreements if you can. We also have some agreements with some private entities that were politically connected, my alma mater, as well as a couple other large landowners, and just condemn the property, pay them, and be done with it. These agreements haunt you all the way through the project, and any change you make 2 years down the road is going to cost you, just a bundle, much more than the land would have cost originally. Special challenges, they're ongoing. This project, as I'll mention in a moment, was funded 100% by local funds, no FTA, no state money. Within the very dense areas in the east-west corridors, I mentioned there's a lot of affluent neighborhoods there. They're well connected, a lot of lawyers. And they tried to stop the projects by stating that trains purchased with federal funds will be riding on the project, so it's a federal project, so we should have to go through the federal process. Unfortunately, that lawsuit was thrown out a couple times. And now it's almost done, so hopefully they've given up. We had to terminate our original design and construction management team halfway through. We've been able to overcome that. Once the budget, we started going over budget, it was clear that we were going to go over budget, had to go out for some additional bonds. There was another group who tried to stop that and put that to a referendum. We were able to overcome that. We've had ongoing issues with minority businesses, and we've got people laying down in front of the trains. Al Sharpton came to town. And we're at about 16% now overall, which was very near our goals for most of the contracts.
Just at 2 distant places.
That was as of yesterday, so it may have changed. Final capital cost, the original estimate was 550, and the actual cost right now is 676. And a lot of these costs are due to delay claims. The other key issue that was also mentioned earlier by Mark is make sure you get all your property and your utilities moved before you start. We found a lot of utilities that we didn't know were there because, again, it's an old, dense neighborhood. Probably at least 150 once we started digging that we didn't know were there. So nothing you can do about that, but get all the utilities that you are aware of out of the way before you start. I mentioned 100% local funding. Right after we opened the system in '93, we had a lot of goodwill. Went out to the voters and asked them for an additional sales tax to build more Metrolink. That was passed, and that's that quarter-cent sales tax that funded this project. And Mark talks a little bit about the potential of doing a project 100% with 100% local funding. Yeah, it absolutely saves time. FTA doesn't generally like to give 2 grants to one region at the same time. So as I mentioned earlier, we finished the original project in '93. Then we went over to St. Clair, started building that, and that project wasn't going to be done until 2001. So if we started the process then and went out to the FTA and went through the process, we wouldn't have been able to get started on this project until about now, probably, assuming everything worked out. So we actually started this process back in '97, '98. The politicians felt that the people passed this quarter-cent sales tax in '94, and they're not going to sit around and wait for 10 years for something to get started. They said, well, let's bite the bullet here and just fund it 100% locally so we can get something going. So that's kind of how that came to be. Environmental justice has been a big issue. As I mentioned, it's a very affluent neighborhood, and we have these agreements with these cities, and they want a lot of bells and whistles on their alignment that we don't have in some of the less affluent neighborhoods. So that's something we've had to navigate through. In general, the middle-class communities on the north-south part of the alignment have been very supportive and welcome the project. It's just the affluent communities have fought us every step of the way. Grade crossings are an issue. We originally, when the project came over to us from the NPO, on that east-west corridor along Forest Park Parkway, they had a number of grade crossings in the plan, and we eliminated all but one of them. So we only have one at-grade crossing on this whole alignment. And that's just to keep it consistent with our system as it exists today, which is very exclusive right-of-way, nothing in the traffic. So again, we can keep our high speeds as well as our safety record. Here's the overall story of the alignments. It went from 17 miles up to 46 miles, which will be in a few months when we open the cross-county project. And the parking spaces, I agree with Mark, build as much parking as you can. It's a lot harder to get later, so and especially at the end stations. There's a question about operating and maintenance costs. I have a lot more details here that I can share and leave with you. Here's kind of the general look. The operating costs and maintenance costs, about $44 million for the rail system. We allocate the overhead, that's about $55 million a year. That includes the estimate for cross county. So that's for 46 miles of rail, $55 million. Our operating schedules, we started off in 1993 at 7.5 minutes in the peak, 10 minutes in the off-peak. We tried in 2001 for about a month to go to 6 and 12 right after we opened St. Clair. It wasn't really justified, so we went back to 7.5 and 10. And then back in 2004, we cut it back to 10 and 10. However, when we open cross county, we're going to have that junction area. So we're going to have trains going both ways. So one train will go up to the airport, one train will go to Shrewsbury. So in that core area in downtown St. Louis, there's going to be a train running every 5 minutes during the peak times. Overall ridership strategies, I mentioned we've always done really well with our ridership when compared to the forecasts. Activity centers is big. We have pass programs with all of our colleges where the students get a free pass to ride the transit. And it's just rolled into their tuition fees, and then we work out a deal with the college. And there's a number of other programs we go and work with the various companies along the alignment. And finally, transit-oriented development, there were some questions about that. Phase 1 was very slow. A lot of people, it just wasn't an issue. As I mentioned, it was an abandoned rail corridor. So there was in a lot of areas it's difficult to have any TOD. It's just kind of starting now. So, or maybe a couple years ago. So it took about 10 years for TOD to begin to sprout up along the alignment. Phase 2 was much quicker. There were a couple of people that we were talking to right as we opened. There's a lot of residential along there, and I'll show some pictures in a moment. And then Phase 3, which is the cross-county alignment, They've just been crawling all over us from the time the project was announced. There are developers calling us all the time. There are already a couple that are completed, waiting for the alignment to open. So it's very tied to the type of neighborhood you're going through. It's been our experience. And here's some developments along the alignment. There's a new Westin Hotel right next to a station. A new theater, which is just abuts our Delmar station. This was an old abandoned factory, a paint factory, completely redone, tied to our Wellston station. And this is Parsons Place, a whole new housing development in East St. Louis. And this is East St. Louis, Illinois, just over the river. This is the first housing they've had in East St. Louis since the 50s. It's really a big deal. Totally revitalizing the neighborhood. They have about 400 units in there now. It's really been wonderful.
400 police officers.
Jackie joined our courtesy center. It's a Boys and Girls Club right next to our alignment. So it's really worked out well over on the Illinois side. And finally, we're working with a developer right next to our alignment. This is a public-private partnership where we're building a garage, 1,300 spaces, where we're going to have 900 spaces, and the developer will have 400 spaces for their development, and then we get to use their spaces in the evenings and the weekends, so we can have all 1,300. So we're kind of worked out this very complicated deal where we're essentially buying condominium units on the garage from them for our parking. That's all I have.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
You're welcome.
One quick question before we have David up. Can we get this
Yes, sir.
Just
switched over?
a broad question, we have to do all over the motion.
A few things. I mentioned the parking. Get as much parking as you can up front. We find ourselves constantly trying to add parking, especially at the end stations. The big issue or constraint that we have is our platforms are only built for 2-car consists. We build longer platforms to accommodate 3-car consists. It comes to a certain point where you can only put so many trains in the alignment. It's better to have longer cars. We were constricted in the existing underground tunnel. Couldn't really do it practically, so that would definitely be one. I think I touched base on all the others.
You mentioned high platforms. You were going to tell us something about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion about that. It kind of ties into the whole street running. But there's basically the NPO back in the original days really felt that the high platform would just make it a lot easier for people with disabilities and just kind of keep the, ties in with keeping the whole separate right-of-way concept. So we've gotten to a point now where there's not much more abandoned rail right-of-way within the region. So it's going to be difficult to expand this system anymore. And that's kind of tied in a little bit. I know you can do high platforms in the streets, but it's not as easy as a lower platform. So it was a decision that was made, and it's good for this system. However, it's going to restrict our future expansion. Yes, sir?
Why did you terminate midway through the original design construction team?
We're still in a lawsuit right now, so I'd probably rather not get into that.
And we're going to have lots of time for questions right after this afternoon. So thank you very much, Chris. We appreciate it.